All right, so why don't we start by having everyone introduce themselves? So I guess if you want to introduce yourself, your name, what group you were testing with, and I guess probably we should say how you finished at Worlds.
Sure, I'll start. I'm Analyzechris. I test with Snare Bears. I played Gagarin and Big Max, and I finished, I think, 111th because I scrubbed out a little early and I dropped just to root on the rest of my team.
All right, is it my turn?
Mhm.
All right, I'm Bridgeman or Finn, Sweden. I've been testing with Unbanned, my testing group, and I finished 10th. Yep, that's it.
I'm Janktivist, John. I test with the Snare Bears, and I was on PD and Big Max, or a Big Max, and I finished 3rd.
Hi, I'm Patrick, aka RotomAppliance, also a Snare Bear, and I played PD and Max as well, and I won.
I'm Peter, also known as Percomis. I play with the NWE group. I finished 5th, and I was on Adam and a very murder-heavy version of Gagarin.
Hello, I'm Rustryder. I'm with Unbanned, so that's like Bridgeman, the King, Soccer, Mitch, and Leopold. And I played Apoc Max and Acme, and I got 4th.
He means Osmari, by the way.
Oh yeah, it's been some time.
Yeah, I was on the same IDs.
My turn, yeah?
Yep.
I'm Brandon, the King, and I test with Unbanned, and I played Apoc Max and Acme. And I came 36th, something like that.
This was the first Worlds where I try-harded and actually tested decks more than the night before Worlds. And it felt like this Worlds was a little bit different from previous Worlds in the sense of how much the meta was scoped out and what people were kind of expecting to do going into this. There was a lot of different approaches, and most testing groups seemed to end up in a different place. So I thought it'd be interesting to get at least a couple of them in the room, and we could talk about sort of how we got to where we went and what we would think about doing differently if we were to do a run back Worlds. So I guess the first question obviously is, like, how did you decide what decks were even worth testing? And maybe I'll start with someone from Unbanned, and then we'll kind of see where the conversation goes from there.
Should I take it or?
Yep, you're up to bat.
Okay. Yeah, what decks were worth testing? I mean, yeah. So first, I mean, on that list, it's, I guess, stuff that has been good in the past. So, and then yeah, looking at the ban list, like what could potentially be good then in the future. So, was looking. Well, obviously PD is a candidate to look at. Then the Acme list that did well. I tested a little bit. Gagarin is interesting. Because I mean it's been really good in the past. Now it's not been available for a long time, and the same with Osmari. So yeah, then what exactly to put in those IDs? That's a more difficult question. For runners, I mean, okay, I sports metal was I kind of dismissed it at first, but yeah, you could still kind of play it, I suppose, but wasn't really expecting people to bring that, and I didn't practice much against it. Yeah, then for me, like the obvious candidate was Apoc Max on the runner side, because it was really good in the past and didn't lose any tools, and like probably a lot of people would bring PD. Yeah, but then the other obvious questions was like, okay, is Adam good now that Mad Dash is a thing? And Pad Tap is back, which is also good in Adam. And then the other question is like, is Crim still playable after 419 is gone? Can you play a Steve list? And then like any kind of Reg Anarch stuff, like tested a bit of Washiko, just with Pad Taps and Resekis and stuff. Like, do you suddenly have enough tools where just good stuff Anarch works? That was kind of just. I think those are the ones that we were just like, at least me, thinking about. And then like it evolved a little bit from there, like some kind of grinder Jinteki, like something that abuses like shipment from tenant to just score out from hand because that's was unbanned. And I looked a little bit at some trying to abuse Encore in some shaper, but it was just kind of a meme. Yeah, I think yeah, that's enough blabbering from me.
I'm not sure I got the question right. Do you want to hear like how we came to the conclusion of some decks, or just like what decks were playable?
Just candidates, I think. Like
Yeah, I think this was
what we wanted to test. So
yeah. My idea was sort of to do a 1-2 here of just like, what did you guys look at the meta? Because I think, and maybe I'm incorrect, but like, because this list sounds pretty similar to what the Snare Bears were kind of exploring as options. But I was wondering if people thought there's going to be different places, because we all ended up in slightly different areas, and so I kind of wanted to figure out where in the process people started diverging.
We got similar conclusions as well. So I think there's two parts to this, right? One is assuming what most people will play. So there's decks that you have to be able to beat. And for us, that was the same conclusion that most people probably still going to play PD and some form of criminal, most like out of Steve. So we tried those decks out ourselves, PD and Steve, and then we also tried a bit of Zaya. We found both decks being underwhelming, mostly PD because Pat Tap we just put Pat Tap into everything, and then PD suffered very much against Pat Tap. And then with Criminal, we found that it kind of felt slower or not as good as other decks. And then in parallel, we found Gagarin Bunkers, and it was interesting for us that the testing lists that were published from an SBT team said that Gagarin is not the real deal, and we just started playing it and found it that we just constantly murdered people. And you have this habit of you go to Jaina Casual, do a Smurf, murder people in under 5 minutes, 15 times in a row, and you're like, oh, this is amazing. And then you bring it into the group, and then you start losing to the people who know how to play against it. So we didn't know if it was a fluke or not, but we felt that there's something with Gagarin. So then we figured that because most people think that it's not that good based on what was published in RDB and what seemed to be like a consent in the other groups that grindy murder Gagarin is not the real deal. We assumed that a lot of people wouldn't be playing it, and then because of that, and because we think it's a strong deck, it's a good choice. And on runner's side, I think for most of the time we tried out Apoc Max because Apoc Max is a very good PD matchup. We felt. Plus, Pat Taps just goes nicely into Apoc as well because just put it down. They will have to trash it eventually. It makes you a lot of money. And we assumed that Apoc Max would be good against the asset tax, but the more we tried it, the more we felt that it's not. So we just kept losing to CTM all the time mostly because of Ares just scored and then just dying after the Apoc. And we tried like deuces and just removing tags, but it never felt correct. And we also found that you just lose to Gagarin as well. Early on, not that much, but then we introduced Overseer Matrix, and that just made the Apoc matchup unbearable for the Apoc stacks. So, but to be honest, until the last moment, I was contemplating to playing Apoc Max or Adam. And Adam was like an interesting thing that came into our group because Asgore made the deck, and it just made sense to include all the good cards from other factions. And when we find the deck that we don't know if it's good enough or not, we don't do an actual gauntlet. So it's not like we go officially through like various deck types. We said, okay, let's see how it plays out against various decks. And once we included the the murder attack against our Gagarin, all the yellow matchups became trivial. So we had misdirection, and you had Sports Hopper. Sports Hopper just makes newer spike a non-game. Just put it down and then you're good. So and we all started playing Adam, and it felt like a very good deck in that regards. But yeah, we also like assumed that most of the meta would be PDs. People would play CTM because people love CTM and it seemed to be in a good spot. And Adam was rough against PD, but it basically beat everything else. Otherwise we could have played Apoc. But again, whenever we played Apoc against CTM, it just felt miserable. Yeah.
Cool.
On the Corp side, we've just felt Gagarin is listed strongest like ever. And we were baffled that no one else came to we were just like, why aren't people talking about Murder Gagarin? It's so good.
Well, part of the reason we weren't talking about it was because we wanted to keep it secret for Worlds too. So
that is fair.
It ended up being a good call by the end.
Yeah, we started with at one point we also said that we shouldn't play it with Smurf on JNet because people might catch on that Gagarin is a thing again. So we just kept playing it amongst each others or amongst ourselves.
Yeah, we tried it a bunch, but a little bit, both the dedication and some kill lists and the Gagarin, but I just think what we were testing was just not the right list. So I kind of thought it was pretty easy to beat with correct play from almost anything. But when you have a very tight list, it becomes a different story.
Yeah. And early on we also had punitive. We took that out for slots mostly because we had this false lead and the overseer matrices. But early on you had the bioethics suit, you had urban renewals, and you had punitives as well. So there was so many lines of just murdering the runners straight up. Because if they leave your econ alone, just put down a CityWorks project and then murder them with punitives and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a murder machine.
All right. I guess does anyone from it sounds like basically everyone had the same idea of what they were wanting to scout out as what was out there.
Yeah, I don't want to rehash too much what other people said, but I think the broad strokes are that the ban list, knocked down a couple decks, like sports and 419, obviously, but it didn't necessarily create any huge winners. So a lot of our time was spent looking at all these newcomer decks like Asmari and Gagarin, and taking another look at Steve and seeing which would be the most popular and trying to figure out the field was way more important than in previous years because usually in Worlds you find the two best decks and you mash them against each other. But in this case, trying to predict the meta was a little more important because who knows, maybe a grinder Jinteki deck would come to the forefront, or maybe Neurospike would be all over the place. I remember dying to Neurospike on turn 3 the night before Worlds, and I was like, did I make a horrible mistake?
Yeah, so I guess actually I might pass it over also. I'm going to show off the Snare Bear Worlds Gauntlet and just kind of be because I wanted to basically ask the question of how did your groups come to the set of decks that you guys were generally choosing between? Because I think almost no group did all the same decks. Most people had some personal preferences for one deck or the other. So I sort of thought it might be interesting to talk about the process inside the groups on how you tailored the decks and to some extent tuned them as well. So I guess I might go to Snare Bears first and what do you guys think the meta would look like, and how does this inform your deck selections going into the day?
Well, basically we argue about numbers on the spreadsheet for a couple days and then kind of do whatever we think felt best. But the most helpful thing here, I think, was determining how much of each faction we'd see. So those are the numbers at the top and the left, respectively, for Corp and Runner, and try to figure out how much equity are you gaining by going in a particular color pie. So Steve ended up having the most favorable matchups, but not all of us are great Steve players. It's really just Patrick and Rob. So a lot of this ended up being personal preference of what you felt more comfortable with. And then Gagarin ended up having the best matchups overall as well, with PD being up there. But I think that at this level of play, you just need to be comfortable with your deck, and any of these top tier IDs are good in this field. And it turns out that you needed to have game against a lot of different decks, as opposed to just finding the magical best 2 decks that beat everything.
This sheet was kind of interesting because by the time we got onto this and we were doing like our little mini tournament testing games, I'd already moved off of Steve and I was on Max, even though I was down as playing Steve in this. I think that's kind of why I didn't play a lot of my games, was because I'd sort of pretty much made up my mind that I was going to play Max at that point. And I guess from my perspective on Corp, I thought quite early that I'd be playing either PD or Asmari. That's not because I think they're the only 2 viable Corps, just the 2 that I thought I was choosing between for myself. And I guess the biggest decision I was making was how much I thought people were going to be playing Apoc again, because I think on a lot of content, I think a lot of people talked about Apoc suddenly being really bad. I can't remember who exactly. I think the process maybe said that they thought Apoc had lost out quite a lot. And I think maybe we said it in the Snare Bears as well. And I think like some other group or somebody else, it felt like people were talking a lot about Apoc not being very good. And I think a lot of people were perhaps taking out their Apoc tech from their decks. So a big question for me was how much of that do I keep in? Like, do I hold on to my Crisium grids or do I take them out completely to try and have the best game possible against Big Max? Because Crisium grid is pretty rubbish against Big Max. So I guess those were the sorts of things I was trying to decide. And I guess I went halfway. I decided to play 1 Crisium, which maybe isn't the best choice. I don't think I've actually tested 1 Crisium PD against Apoc at all, so it probably isn't a very great matchup.
Funnily enough, the reason we took Apoc seriously is because the process said that they don't even test, like they don't even consider Apoc.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so people might be removing the Apoc tech, so Apoc becomes more real.
Sure.
Yeah, I think our conversations about APOC were definitely off. I mean, because we see people here even did really, really well with APOC. And then when we did our little mini tournament, I got assigned Apoc Max, and I think I swept through my matchups. I mean, I didn't play them all. But then at that point, I kind of felt like, oh, it might just be a little bit too late for some reason. I feel like I was already set with Big Max as well, and I just kind of felt like shifting over to Apoc Max just wouldn't be great because I just had been practicing with Big Max more, and I know that Big Max had the depth and the versatility, but in retrospect, I'm not even sure for me which would have been the better choice.
Funny because we had the reverse. So Big Max came late into our, I'm not gonna say testing process, but we played a bunch of games in the weeks before Worlds, and we played a bunch of Apoc because we wanted to see how Gagarin fares against Apoc, and we wanted to see how PD is, so we tried it against Apoc. So we played a lot of Apoc Max games, and then Big Max came fairly at the end, like very close to Worlds, and we were kind of surprised that like 60 card decks are a thing, and I don't know, everything in our bones said that this cannot be true. Like that can't work. And then we started trying it out, and it felt good. But at that point, we were also kind of similarly set to like, okay, I'm either playing Apoc Max or Adam, and this can be real. But also, we had the same thing as you all mentioned, that there was a lot of personal preference in what is the deck I can pilot better. Because, for example, me personally, I played a bunch of Adam games leading up to Worlds, and then I played less Apoc Max, but still more than Big Max, for example. So, I was thinking that maybe Adam is the correct choice because I just put more games into it than out of the deck, and I know how to play it, and it's very tech heavy, and you can tech out some matchups. But yeah, we also like a lot of people in the group were like, I can't play Adam because I haven't played it as much as you do, so I'm gonna play Apoc Max because that seems to be the next best deck, for example.
It was really funny. Like, or like I remember I wasn't really paying attention to what people were saying on forums and stuff, but one day like Sokka and me were just discussing like potential runners, and he was like, so like people are saying that Apoc Max is bad now, and I was like, what? Why? It's like the deck is amazing, and yeah, it seemed like coming out of nowhere, and I think in a way it's like strengthened that decision. I think the only thing that like it made me doubt going for Apoc Max was a grinder Jinteki. Like if someone was playing a really nasty, like just pure grinder list scoring from hand, like you basically can't win against that with Apoc Max. But everything else is pretty good. You have great game against PD. You basically kill all Neurospike decks, and I think, well, I know there's disagreement here, but personally, I find like Apoc Max is actually really good against CTM, unless they're like super teched against it. Like you need to hit the like even if they score an Aris, you usually you're able to blow up the board one time and without getting killed, and it's kind of hard for them to develop a remote. And it depends a little bit on what kind of like tag punishment they play. Especially if they don't have kill tag punishment, it is really good because often you can just take the tags and Stargate and you rebirth into Alice, and they have to like discard a bunch of cards.
We looked
Yeah.
into those. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I just wanted to add to that as well. I found like before it was like Continental season. I think the big thing with the Apoc Max that we found is adding the Out of the Ashes just flipped a lot of games on its head. I think that was a really key card. And then a card that I really liked in the deck as well was Fenris. I know Bridgeman will still hold tight to his Aesops, but Fenris is the GOAT.
Do you just in Apoc Max? Do you just use Fenris as get into Steve and just play a long game and not Apoc the board? Is that the purpose?
So it's it's your fourth copy of Labor Rights, and there's times where Max is just rude to you, and it just 2 Stargates right off the top or 2 Apocs right off the top. You can Steve get it back and Apoc in the same turn. So it's just that extra recursion, like if you see it, if you're, and then there's like the just busted part where it's like if you Apoc and then get your Fenris down, like it's very hard for you to lose.
Yeah. But again, when we tried Apoc Max, there were a bunch of games. For example, against Gagarin, we found against Gagarin that you're not supposed to Apoc. You just want to control the assets, make tons of money, and then win eventually when you run them out of recursion and cards. For example, I imagine there as well, just having the Steve down and playing like Reg Max out of Apoc Max shell. That Fenris helps as well, I assume.
Yeah, that and why I like the Out of the Ashes because what it let you do was like decks like that you could like NCTM you could Apoc with Out of the Ashes, and then either if you need to clear tags or get money up because in mine I play triple Fermenter, so you just let Fermenter cook, and then you'd go to blow up the board, and one of your clicks would just be like click Fermenter for like $8 or $10. It's like really nice.
Yellow Glacier good against Apoc then, so the Acme and like the Asmari that Bridgeman and Rustryder brought, was that meant to be like sort of tech against Apocalypse?
So the my philosophy was like I'm just trying to find a deck that like can do okay against everything I'm scared of. And I was scared. I forgot to mention Hive Mind Max before, of course, which is a deck that I was scared of, but didn't end up seeing a lot of it. I was thinking like NWE would certainly, like a couple of them would bring it. Like maybe not a lot of just like players overall, but like if one of the best teams are really good with it, then and we want to do well in the top cut, then we might need to be able to beat Hive Mind Max. So that's why the magnets are there. That's why the Salams is there, and it started with the SPL list Asmari, and then just like morphed over time. But yeah, one of the things we tested a lot against was Apoc Max, and it just seemed like you have enough. Like it's not that you just like have a very favorable matchup necessarily. I think it's a good matchup. Like you trigger the ID a lot because they have to play a lot of events, and you have good ice against the breakers like Hydra, super taxing, Toll Booth, really taxing, and you have Biovaults that make pulling off an Apoc tricky. You have the Salem's threat. Even if you don't draw it, there's always the threat that you will get rid of all their labor rights. And if you draw it and pull it off, even better. So it was like, it just seemed like it checked the boxes in like almost every matchup that it's good enough. Like against Apoc Max, good enough. Against Time Max with the tech, definitely good enough. It seemed it's kind of struggle maybe against Steve if they play really well, if they have the right cards. But yeah, everything else like Anarch in general, they just have trouble breaking the ice. So if you can just get enough money and like solidify, then eventually they'll run out of steam. So yeah, it was just the process of trying to find a deck or a corp, which I had a lot of trouble finding a corp that's like feels solid against the entire field of things that I'm expecting. Like I wasn't happy picking PD in part because, well, I had tried against a bunch of things, and personally, like even though I'd done well with PD previously this year, like even in matchups where it felt like I felt like it should be good, it didn't feel as good anymore. Maybe it's like the pad taps that you have trouble trashing or the hippos, whatever. But it's also hard for me to get over the fact that I know that if I'm sitting across an Apoc player, I'm just gonna lose basically automatically. So, and that's very tough psychologically to pick something that you know is like losing against a good deck. Then you have to really expect that to be a small portion of the field. Yeah, so the Asmar was just like, oh, it actually felt like I can win a game against whatever runner I'm up against, and then it's just about, okay, you just playing better than your opponent. You're not getting screwed over by the matchup and just automatically losing anything.
Yeah, I played the Acne, and it was not my best choice. I'll tell you what. But the thought process there was, I didn't believe for how much that. Actually, I'll start at the beginning. I think one of the big things in consideration for our process was, because we have representation in Asia Pacific, Americas, and Euros. It's like, what is our competition going to bring for the day that we play was also like a big thing. And I just didn't believe how much Snare Bears played Big Max in public, and because it was like a 60, 70 card pile of cards, that it was like, oh, they're actually going to bring this. So it was just like, just kind of a disregard for that deck, which was just super wrong. And just like, yeah, want to go against Apoc, want to make it hard for Anarch Breakers, and the Biovaults were very nice. They definitely saved some games for sure. To the last maybe day, I was on PD and then pivoted to Acme.
All right.
Yeah,
Well,
I can add a little to the Acme stuff. Like, yeah, it's like the problem with Big Max. That, I don't know if this is what you felt too, Brandon, but it's just like with pad tap in the game, like there wasn't a lot of like reg-ish anarchs out there before, so like you never experienced how it feels to get your eyes hippoed, which feels really bad in Acme because every piece you can play fewer eyes because every ice is stronger, but you also like you rely more on like an individual piece of ice, and also like the money you invest into resting that piece of ice. Suddenly, like losing a piece of ice is really big, and it's hard to trash pad taps as well. Again, a money problem. So like it can be very sluggish to actually get rolling and being able to protect your service properly, which is another reason why the Asmari works well. You just get more money. You have a smaller deck, so it's easier to draw your daily quest. And because you have more money in general, it's also like the hippos. They're still like can be hard to deal with, but you're able to replace the ice because you have more ice, more money.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that part of the matchup. So I think people mostly explain like sort of how they tested. I guess does anyone have any other like final thoughts on like how they prepared for Worlds and major considerations they feel like haven't been mentioned yet? Or
I have one question. Did anyone of your groups look into Polana? Because we completely blanked on it. And I faced the Polana round 1 in the Swiss, which I won with Adam, but I was not sure if I'm gonna die. And they had a ganked unanswered, which is scary. But we never even considered Polana. I'm just curious if anyone else looked into it.
It was actually a big consideration. I'll throw over to Arndt because he made like the most cancerous list, the original version of it at least, and we were actually almost bringing it, some of us. So
yeah, we had like a very mean Polana list with like upgrades, and we played around with the influence for News Team and Boom. And it was such a pain to play, but it was even worse to play against it. And like the only reason we like ended up not playing it because we were afraid of the time, because you wouldn't win in like 30 minutes. So every game you would win would be like around like mostly 40, 45. We were just afraid of like the time constraints. So we wouldn't be able to make sure to win games on our own. So if good runners would just like stay back, take money, and we wouldn't find enough fast advance pieces, then we wouldn't be able to win on our own. And we were afraid that like people would figure it out. We were like playing around with like the agenda suit to like play around it, because like there was some point at like when we were practicing it where it's like, oh wait, I have this and this agenda scored, so now you can't win except with oboes, and you can't fast advance those. So it was a very, we put in like, I want to say like more than 1 week just into the Polana, and we had like fun just like playing around it, and we even had like the best name for it. Like we were just like, okay, like it's not the best deck to play, but if you win with it, we have the perfect deck name for it. So it was going to be named like Jinteki Mon Amour, with like the Eyemore, the very bad eyes, which like trashes cards off the top of the deck. And yeah, that's the story of our Jinteki, which never got played, unfortunately.
I think our story there was pretty much the exact same thing, like almost exactly. We had largely disregarded Glacier Polana. Steve just crushed it. Big Max was fine against it because having 70 cards, just works. And then I think I had played a couple games against somebody, might have been even from your testing group. And I was like, oh my God, there's a disgusting Polana deck up there. I tried to toss it up onto our deck list channel, put up a very, very inaccurate version of it. And then I think Kisser came along and was like, okay, let me try to like make this deck, as gross as possible. And we, pretty much landed on that same thing, which was just completely awful to play against, but also took too long to win. And so for those exact same reasons of time, I think no one went for it.
Just without the cool multilingual deck name.
Yeah, I think we just landed on Depression Polana or something like that.
Casually was Cancer Polana, but the nicer name was Monaimor.
I guess actually,
I would like. I guess I'd add that for me it wasn't only about time, because I was like, well, I can just play really fast. But I was still afraid that like with the agenda suite that people may figure out that like if you steal like a certain set of agendas, then there's no out for the Jinteki without scoring from the board. Like you have to score an oboe. If you snatch like a set of agendas. Also, Steve felt like Anarch in general felt really good to play against with it, but Steve wasn't as like you weren't as sure. Also, like if Big Max gets lucky and it gets a rebirth, you can get screwed over. So it feels rough when things are like, I don't know, not under your control. So even though it's pretty unlikely that they're gonna get their rebirth, like you just hate the fact that that's a possibility. Yeah, and also it's kind of like it doesn't feel good. Like it feels boring to play. It's you're just sitting there and waiting for things to happen instead of like making them happen.
Through the first half of testing, was not having really any success with Corps. So there was definitely a strong consideration to just shotgun sports metal, and hopefully you get there.
That is sort of what. So like in the Snare Bears, we were doing a testing tournament, and I think that's actually how a lot of us ended up on the Gagarin list. Though I don't actually know of any. Chris, did you end up on the Gagarin list or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Jonas,
so
Jonas and Scry and I played Gagarin. So I think Jonas, Big Unit, was the first one to be like throwing this around and very confident in it. And a lot of our testing group, assumed, well, Jonas is very good with this deck, but can we win with it? It seems, pretty high variance. You've got SDS Join Deployment, which, can just throw off your game if someone randomly snags that from R&D. But Jonas had 80, 90% win rates with it on Gen at casual, even against good players. So we had to take it seriously. So we continued to develop the deck. Ranji Dog, Ian, wanted to go a little more fast advance with the agenda suite. We didn't originally have an Audacity in there, and we started to realize that the deck was powerful because it rejected this fundamental premise of the meta, which was that value is king, that you need to just be the most efficient, like PD getting, recursion of seamless and just winning as quickly as possible with your efficient rush deck. And this is more like, hey, I'm going to present a threat to you turns like 1 and 2, and maybe kill you if you make a mistake. And it helped a lot that there was no real shaper in the meta, because this deck isn't just kill. You start out by just like flooding the board with assets to try to get that overwhelming boost of econ to potentially kill someone, and oftentimes just sneak out agendas to score them. So if you can score 1 or 2 off the board, you can transition to fast advance before everyone starts destroying your board, because the runners are so rich that they're going to get to a point where you don't really threaten them anymore. So the question is, can you get 3 or 4 points so you can hostile or Audacity or Rococo out? So yeah, I don't think it's a great deck. I think the reason why we chose it was because it wins when people make mistakes, and it has this unfamiliarity with a lot of the player base, because Gagarin just got unbanned, that it's very easy to pick on players who make mistakes against it.
Great. And I guess, so Peter, if you could talk a little bit about how NWE ended up on this other version of Gagarin a little bit. I know you've talked about it a bit, but just sort of what the last couple of slots kind of were, I guess.
Yeah, so the deck started out a bit differently, but we just took how you imagine a murder Gagarin deck, and the deck was made by Asger. So he just brought in a Gagarin list, which was very close to what the SBT has published, but we just went free on the bioethics, free on the renewals. Like we went free on everything that kills the runner. All the econ warfare is hardly used. Like any murder you can pack in. And we started testing that, and I think we just found it very, very strong in general, because you put this runner into like very strong forks. Like there's bioethics and urban renewals on the board, and if they let the urban fire, they have to be aware if there's a face down bioethic somewhere, because they might just die. And then so there was a lot of these decisions. Or we can also push a some Cityworks project, for example, if you know that if they steal it, they die, and there's punitive as well. So there's a lot of these forking decisions there. And we originally had Above the Law as a very simple solution to Citadel. Like we always killed citadels with above the law. Just like there was always a hidden naked above the law somewhere on the board that was just waiting for us for a citadel to come down. We started playing that a lot, and I'm not even sure how the discussion came for false lead. And I know Asger brought the false lead version, and this is like an amalgamation of various versions because Pinzel also started testing various cards. He started testing, I don't remember the name, but there's an asset that can advance and does meat damage at the beginning of your clearinghouse. He also tried out clearinghouse at one point, but that was kind of a fluke. But he had the idea of overseer matrix. And it is sometimes people just bring in these weird cards that you haven't seen in your life before. And we try to decide if oversteer matrix is a win more card or it actually does something. And that's when we realized that if you just put two on top of each other, you cannot be apoc'd ever. So overstay matrix kind of came in, and then we tried to look for slots. Again, originally we had bioethics, and because bioethics is something that we found was very good against just Max and Steve's decks as well, because it grinds out the deck slowly, and then if they're down to low cards, then Urbernil is way more potential. And again, punitive and Cityworks projects become very strong if they run out of cards. So it just helped the runner like grind out the runner in a kind of slow fashion, but also in a more reasonable time. We never found that the games take 45 minutes or something, as the others mentioned with the Polana. And then Asger came up with false lead, and false lead was good because so the original version had punitives for the scenario where the runner just leaves your money assets alone, and you have infinite credits, but then you're trying to figure out what to do with infinite credits, right? Because you can't really score, so if you just sit back, they trash your important assets in urban and bioethics. There's not much you can do if they have money to not get hardly used after. And that was where punitive was good, because then you just try to score, and if they steal, they die. If they don't steal, then they just score out, which is a weird thing with the deck, but happens sometimes. And then Asger came up with the false lead idea, which is also a very cool thing, that if they just leave your board alone and try to focus on the murder assets, you score a false lead, and now you can just turn any money advantage into a heart in use that just sticks because they won't have enough clicks to remove the tags. Of course, misdirection, which we talked about, like how likely it is to face misdirection. We knew anyone in our team, and Adam, will have misdirection, and then that was just Asger and myself, because that kind of forced the plan. But also you can get into this spot where they Citadel trace, because you probably need to spend a lot of money on the hard thing use, and then Citadel removes a tag, and then the question is, can you like do both trash and murder and things like that? But false lead was a very good turning point for runners that that just leave your board alone, because a lot of times that's the correct thing to do. Just ignore the board early on, maybe tank one or two urban renewals if you can, and just try to ignore the board, because what we found is most runners just ran stuff and died. But the ones that sit back, that's where false lead was important, and these were like the main key points of the deck. So we took out bioethics. We started adding Marilyn for more longevity. We had way more recursion back then, original version, so we had more preemptives and more judge work. I think I'm not sure if we had free judge works, but we had more preemptives definitely. So we took kind of those out for slots. Also, we were bonkers about wall to wall. Like wall to wall was so crazy good in the deck that it just draws you more and more card, and you can spam more stuff, and it costs 1 to res. And you have these very rare scenarios where it's the only thing that's rest, and then you get way more value. So we loved it in the deck. So yeah, that was basically it. Like, they were these key points that we're like, okay, this is the correct choice to put into the deck, and then we just combined those key points to the list that came to be.
Yeah, wall to wall was one of the few ways with Jeeves that we could actually get the tempo ahead of the runner. Having that extra card was huge, because you didn't want a turn where it was just draw, install.
Yeah. And wall to wall is so versatile. Like, you could run CSR, but then wall to wall can. A lot of times, what we do, if you have the luxury, because you don't want to draw more cards because your hand is full and you want to keep them in your hand or whatever, you can just start advancing Mausoleses. Because one weird line that you can do, what we found, is that if you can SDS away, like if the triple advance Mausoleus, they cannot ignore Mausoleus anymore, because a lot of times they would just run for Mausoleus, get a tag, get net damage and whatnot, which is very beneficial for the deck, but that doesn't stop like Find the Truth runs, for example, or Stargate runs, or whatever. So it still is very porous. But if you triple advance it, then Mozlas has an ender run now, so they have to break it, which is then a very awkward piece of ice. And a lot of times you would get these incidental wall-to-wall advancements on Mozlas because, you know, you have all the cards you want. You have a Rustryder popping, so you don't want to draw more cards. One card won't make a lot of difference. So like, all right, let's start advancing Mozlas.
Did anything surprise you? What were the surprises on the day that were maybe a little different than the internal meta was going? And this can be a relatively short answer, or if you have a lot to say, I'm all ears. But
I think we were surprised how good Big Max turned out to be honest. We kind of felt it at the end of the testing when it became more public that it's possibly a good deck. We were just baffled by the fact that it's a 60 or even more card deck. But then it performed very strongly and seemed like a honestly correct meta choice. I think that kind of might have surprised the group, at least personally surprised me, to be honest.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. Like as you said, like when I saw Big Max at first, I kind of couldn't believe it, but then after having played against it a couple of times, it was like, okay, it seems like this might actually be a thing. Though when I tried it myself, I didn't like it, but yeah, it was still something that I kept in mind. I was surprised by NWE's lists. Like I did not expect Gagarin to be like a good deck. I think a big oversight though in my Gagarin testing was missing wall to wall somehow. So yeah, you just mentioned how good it is, and I've played it a little bit afterwards, and yeah, wall to wall is amazing. You should play it in Gagarin. Adam was also surprising to me. I still haven't made that one work for me, so I don't know if I'm just bad at playing Adam or yeah, I don't know. But that was really surprising to me. And I was expecting to see Big Max, but I did not expect it to see in like a lot of it in the top cut. So that was surprising. And I was also expecting more Hype Man Max, but we didn't see a lot of it. So I think those are my surprises. I thought
think
maybe
most have
slightly more like cheesy Jinteki builds would be a thing. But luckily, like there wasn't. I still ended up facing one, which was my only loss in Swiss was that. And yeah, if I'd faced more of that, then yeah, things could have gone very differently.
I wasn't surprised that Patrick won Worlds, but I was surprised that Patrick won Worlds on medium-sized max when our testing showed that Criminal was perfectly viable. It seemed like, you know, Steve could have done much better, but first of all, I didn't see a lot, and second of all, you know, I assumed that our top Steve players would be on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think Patrick, you could have done even better if you played Steve.
Better than first,
possibly. Yeah. Yeah, if you'd asked me sort of a bit before our testing, what are you going to play? I would have laughed in your face as if you'd said, oh, you're going to play, you know, not just an Anarch deck, but a 60-card one. And I think the surprise about Big Max being good is understandable. And the only difference for me is that surprise, I kind of, that happened during testing because I play a lot against Laura Osculate. So I was used to having this deck just kind of thrown in my face over and over and over. And I was losing a reasonable number of games to it. So I guess, yeah, the realization just came a bit earlier for me that it was a real deck. But yeah, I didn't think I would abandon Steve in order to play this. But it just clicked, I guess. As soon as I started playing it, it just clicked straight away and it just felt really good.
I think my big surprise, or well, it's not really, I guess, a surprise, but it's kind of like a, you know, why, you know, sometimes it's important to keep decks, you know, a secret. I think if Worlds was 2 weeks earlier and the whole Neurospike deck wasn't out, like it would have just racked up wins. Because you'd have just been like someone would double advance behind a remote and you'd just be like, oh, okay, that's a Polana I'm going to set up. And, and then you'd just be dead. But because it was like known, I remember playing it in Swiss, and it was just like, 40 card Ismari. I know what you're trying to do. Like, and that definitely changes how you play against the deck.
I got something that's maybe not like the biggest surprise, but like the idea that like PD won Worlds, it was like still a bit baffling to me, because like I was always playing PD in casual, and it was doing like fine. Like I would like get wins against everybody, like against every deck. Like it could win against everything, but like the idea to like bring it into like a Apoc Max meta, which we thought, like, I think we overvalued like Apoc Max a bit. Like we thought it was like the best deck, and everybody knows it's the best deck, so you can't bring PD. And then just like seeing PD win was a bit of a surprise.
Well, it was. I played it into a much heavier Apoc meta, the previous meta. That was where I was bringing 2 Crisium grids, and I found it was an equal matchup. I found like it was perfectly winnable as PD. I don't know whether it's the same with 1 Crisium. I guess you have to get a bit luckier and find it. I think I literally haven't played it against an Apoc deck, so maybe that was a bit riskier. But apart from that, it seems to have a fair matchup against most things. You can play against Steve, you can play against Big Max. I think you're favoured against Hive Mind Max, although I didn't encounter any. And I guess you're favoured against Adam, although that didn't really come into my thinking.
You also have border controls, right? I think that's the important detail there, that not just Crisium. Like the old version had Crisiums and border controls.
The thing is, like, Out of the Ashes gets around border control. I don't know. I tried it a bit against Apoc with 2 Crisiums myself, because it was a consideration, and it seemed like, okay, it still didn't feel good to me, but I'm going to trust Patrick on that. But it felt like I can win. I can win if I have 2, but I would be really scared like going in with 1. And so like when I was considering PD, it was like, okay, I really don't want to go in with 2 Crisiums, because I'm just gonna they're gonna be useless in so many other matchups, because there were a lot of Anarchs playing like the Big Max that barely cares about it, so either like I felt like what you should do is like either just ignore that Apoc is a thing and be like, just assume that not that many people are gonna bring it, and like just to get rid of the Crisiums, or you either that or probably don't play it is probably what I would do. But
as a quick aside from the Apoc issue, I think a lot of people see PD as a deck that plays itself. It's so cheap, it's so fast, and it's unfair. Like if you're playing casually, you can crush people with it. But I think it really does have a high skill ceiling, and there's so much you can do with it in terms of like when do you bluff, when do you rush, which feels like very real Netrunner to me. Like watching some of the games in the cut, I was often seeing moves that I would not have made that made a huge difference, and ended up with a lot of like really tight games, even against decks that are kind of favored against it. Like you have to play pretty perfectly as Big Max to mess with PD.
Yeah, I'll second that with PD. Like it does look much easier to play, and certainly just sort of standard play you can do pretty well with it. But I think top level play, it really is one of those decks where like you really have to plan. It comes down to the click, it comes down to the credit, and I think it can be that fine of a difference. I didn't go with any Crisiums on PD. So my thought there was that there wouldn't be that much Apoc Max, and a few really good players would be on Apoc Max. And in that case, I remember slotting Crisium in AmCons, and I just got run over by good players on Apoc Max anyway. So I kind of just high rolled it there and said, all right, no Crisiums here, and I'll just sort of see what happens if I go up against one of the few good players with Apoc Max. And so I think my biggest surprise of the tournament that I was right about something, that I was right about that. So that kind of ended up, working out. And I also just very, very luckily ducked a lot of the Apoc Max decks.
Dodge Rustryder seems like a good plan.
Yeah.
And a very nice coin flip. I might add as well.
Yeah. So the King and I, right? We 2-for-1'd, and we were kind of talking about it, and we were like, whoever gets runner is gonna just win this one, and that's just just
This is
a
how
coin
it
flip.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I think people have been hitting on this already, but I guess, if we were to replay this world specifically, was there any other changes you think you would make?
I might actually go with like a Rustryder's version of the Asmari, but I don't think like just swapping that one slot, the Jua, probably would have been nice. Like it's that spiky ice versus Big Max. You always want something like spiky in front that makes it so they can't farm the wheel counters, but like they can't hippo the good ice at the back. That's like the perfect scenario. So yeah, but other than that, like the Apoc Max, I was really happy about. And the Asmari too, but yeah, that's small change. And then just pilot better.
Yeah, I would just put way more games into the PD Adam matchup. I think Adam was a good choice, to be honest. But I just needed more practice against PD. And when you practice a matchup that it's not good for the deck, I think you're prone to not practice it that much. But I should just put more games into that.
I guess also if I had perfect information, like knowing what people would bring, then probably I would not have as much like all that high mind max tech that I put in. Like it seemed necessary at the time, and it made it so that felt like playable. Because without it, it was like, oh, they can just botulus your eyes and get rid of your daily quest. You never get rolling, and then once they hit the late game, they can just tranquilize any expensive eyes, and it's horrible. But yeah, never ended up facing it. So you'd rather, in that case, you'd rather have like your like 2 enigmas and a border control, which is like spiky ice for the Big Max matchup. But then yeah, you can't know beforehand what people are going to bring.
And so I guess actually one final question is, next year we're going to have a different, I assume we're going to have a different meta. So is there any like actual parts of the prep, like World's prep process you think you want to do differently?
I like the idea that the people mentioned like in-house tournament, and that has been something we discussed a lot of times with NWE to just do some kind of in-house tournament for the testing, but we never actually did. So maybe we'll try that next time because it sounds fun.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about was testing, like picking days to really go hard and play more games on fewer days instead of playing lots of games all the time. Just to get more like consistent data, but also just to stop you from just like wearing down, like just having netrunner fatigue.
I'm pretty happy with how our testing process went, but something I learned was, you have to resist the urge to just continually jam games, and it feels good and it feels right, and you feel like you're improving. And I could test 15, 20 games in a day, but I may not improve at the same rate as if I simply watched my teammates play 5 games and talk about the lines. That seems a little more academic and boring, but it's revelatory because obviously you're seeing things that you don't already know, as opposed to just like trying out new stuff and seeing if it works.
Side note on that's how we usually do testing, mostly out of convenience. But usually what happens is 2 players out of the group start playing, and then everyone else jumps on Discord, and now you have 12 people trying to figure out what is the best line to take, and you just expand the 20-minute game to like 45 minutes an hour. But you hear all the weird optimal, you could do this instead of that, and then that will come down the line later on. Just pretty fun. Just not like it's not good with time.
Yeah, it's fun until Rob and Whiteblade spend 20 minutes talking about the single line that's going to beat you.
Yeah.
And then they execute it, and it's like the one agenda on top of RNG that makes you lose the game. You go, come on, no one sees that in a tournament game, but here it's 100% the correct line. So
yeah, in these games, like the accidental agenda during the Apoc is way more like annoying because you figure out how to pull off the Apoc and it just went on the first one. And you're like, well, we spent the last 50 minutes on nothing.
Yeah. I think our testing was a mix of that, like 2 people playing and others just talking, and also us just jamming against each other or just like on our own, trying to figure out different stuff and get like comfortable with a certain deck. I liked like in general, like I was happy with the decks that we reached. It was a shame, like we tested quite a bit of Steve with Sokka, and it seemed really good, but unfortunately on the day it didn't work out for him. But Brandon had a really good idea, or I thought it was a good idea because I always get like really nervous in the top cut, or like I play too fast, or I make some mistakes. That we would like simulate playing top cut games, like having no takebacks, having a time limit, to try to just be more familiar with that situation once it arises. I don't know if it will work, but I think it's something interesting to try.
Yeah, and to add to that, like having it like, you do like maybe 4 or 5 hours of testing and then simulate that game, so like you're on the fatigue side and you practice just playing on that level of fatigue and then simulate what a cut game would be like.
Yeah. And one thing that I think I did right was like not playing until the very end. Like once I decided that I was going to be done with testing like the weekend before, and then just kind of rest and like just maybe think about slots. But basically I would decide like, okay, these will be my decks, and then just like swap 1 or 2 cards perhaps. And that made it so I wasn't like I've been playing so much I was pretty exhausted. And I was like, okay, I need to stop and just decide, and then just spend the rest of the week resting and like getting mentally ready to play. Yeah, because it's easy to just overwork, and then you're just a mess when you actually start playing.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up unless anyone has any final thoughts. But thank you all so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, and hopefully other people will be interested to see this sort of slightly behind the curtain, slightly out of date recollections on Worlds 2021. So thanks everyone for coming and doing this.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. It's interesting. Good to be
Yeah,
here.
thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. Thanks.
But I figured it was worth getting at least who I could get together easily to just talk a little bit about. Sorry, I'm eating a mint. I don't know why I decided to eat a mint in the middle of recording. That was just a terrible idea.
Great idea.
For those fresh insights, right?
Exactly. No, I was like,